Reality is William Husel was an innocent man, always has been and always will be.
Dr. Husel was not found innocent, as everybody knows. He was simply acquitted.
After testimony from 53 witnesses, 5 days of deliberations, the verdict is in. Former Mount Carmel doctor William Husel has been acquitted of 14 counts of murder. And we thank you for joining us for NBC4 at 5. I'm Jennifer Bullock.
And I'm Brad Johansson. That verdict coming in shortly after the jury returned to the courtroom first thing this morning. Dr. Husel worked the overnight shift in the intensive care unit at the now closed Mount Carmel West Hospital. He is accused of ordering lethal doses of fentanyl and other drugs for 14 patients around the time that their ventilators were removed between 2015 and 2018, charged with 14 counts of murder, which jurors found him not guilty of. They also found him not guilty of lesser charges of attempted murder on all 14 of those counts.
And we have team coverage for you tonight. Karina Chung has reaction from the lawyers for the patients' families. Jamie Ostroff breaking down the legal analysis of how the case played out. But first, let's begin with NBC4's Dan Perlman, who has been following this case since the very beginning. Dan?
Well, Jennifer and Brad, I can tell you today here at the Franklin County Courthouse, it was a very emotional day, an emotional day for the patients' families who were in the courtroom. It was also emotional for Dr. William Husel, who wiped tears from his eyes as today's verdict was read.
Count 14, we, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn by the defendant not guilty as to count 14 of the indictment for murder and not guilty of any lesser offenses signed by
With a hug from one of his attorneys, Dr. William Husel learned he was not guilty on all 14 counts he faced. What has he said to you over the last couple of hours since he heard not guilty on all 14 counts, and how is he doing this afternoon?
You know, he said, I asked him what he was going to do today and tonight, and he said his first stop is going to be his church.
That is on the heels of his more than 2-month trial. Husel is a free man. Dr. Husel was accused of ordering lethal doses of drugs or combinations of drugs for 14 patients while working in the Mount Carmel West intensive care unit. His defense argued he was providing comfort care. The jury reaching its verdict after hearing from 54 witnesses, including other doctors, nurses, and loved ones of the patients central to this case.
I feel terrible for all of the patients' families to having had suffered again. But hopefully they'll take solace in knowing that their loved ones' last moments were ones in peace and that they didn't have to suffer bad deaths as a result of a doctor being afraid to make them comfortable.
Jose Baez there calling this a victory for health care and for future patients of Comfort Care. He also calls it a victory for Husel, who heard this verdict more than a week after the jury began its deliberations.
And you know what? Every day during these deliberations, he's had to say goodbye to his daughters. Because, of course, we had to advise him if it was a guilty verdict, he'd likely be taken in custody. And the fact that he's had to do that all of these days, and tonight he can go home, and tomorrow he wakes up and there is no goodbye, it's an incredible thing.
And Menashe there was asked if Dr. Husel plans to practice medicine again. She said that is for a different day. Local for you at the Franklin County Courthouse, Dan Perlman, NBC4.
Dan, thank you. Shortly after that verdict was read, a spokesperson for the Mount Carmel Health Systems released a statement reading in part, "Our thoughts continue to be with the patients' families. It's never been our role to determine whether the defendant's actions in these cases were criminal." The spokesperson went on to say, "We have extensive measures in place designed to prevent anything like this from ever happening again in our health system. We are fully committed to patient safety and will take action whenever patient safety is at issue."
These are the names and faces of Dr. Husel's 14 patients. The youngest, 37 years old. The oldest was 82. Throughout the trial, Husel's defense team argued he was providing comfort care for these patients. Now, Dr. Husel's criminal trial is over, but that doesn't mean his time in court is over yet. There are still 10 civil cases that he will have to contend with. NBC4's Karina Chung spoke to those lawyers today who say their proceedings will be very different than what we saw in the criminal trial. Karina?
Jen, Jerry Leesburg's firm is handling 8 of those civil cases for families when it comes to Dr. Husel and Mount Carmel. Now, Leesburg says their cases will focus solely on negligence.
Dr. Husel can no longer hide behind his Fifth Amendment assertion of a right against self-incrimination.
Jerry Leesburg says he was not surprised that Dr. William Husel was acquitted on all 14 charges of murder. What's next for him and his clients is forging ahead with civil cases. Leesburg says Dr. Husel is scheduled for a deposition May 9th.
Dr. Husel is going to have to defend what he did and explain what he did, and not just sit back at the table and allow his lawyers to stand up and make arguments on his behalf. We call that lawyer talk. The time for lawyer talk is over. We look forward to deposing Dr. Husel.
Leesburg says all of the civil cases will be jury trials, but they will have different experts as witnesses to prove Dr. Husel did not follow accepted standards of medical practice.
Our juries are going to hear a lot more interesting information about who Dr. Husel is, where he came from, where he's been, and how he got to where he was, and what kind of a person he is, so that they can look at his conduct in context.
Again, there are 10 civil cases. They will start in June. One will be heard each month. Now, tonight at 6, what Leesburg has said to his clients now that the criminal trial is over. Local for you in Columbus, I'm Karina Chung, NBC4.
Karina, thank you. And our team coverage of the William Husel verdict continues with NBC4's Jamie Ostroff.
Yeah, Jamie spoke with a criminal law professor at OSU's Moritz College of Law. Jamie, what did he have to say about the outcome?
Well, Brad, criminal law professor Rick Simmons has been following this trial closely. He told me he was surprised that Husel was acquitted on all 14 counts. Simmons said that could have to do with the fact that jurors were contending with a pretty new legal question in the scheme of things regarding comfort care as a person's life nears its end. Simmons said that question all boils down to the doctor's intent when he administered those high doses of fentanyl.
I mean, the defense theory that they presented in their opening and their closing was that the fentanyl was given again to not to hasten death, but to reduce the suffering. And when someone is in that stage of their life, someone so close to death, there's no way to be sure that you are reducing suffering unless you give that much fentanyl. So that provided an alternate explanation for the very, very high doses of fentanyl that were given. And again, the jury thought that was at least a reasonable excuse, a reasonable explanation for why such high doses were given.
Simmons believes both the prosecutors and the defense attorneys presented their cases well and that this was a fair trial.